Well, we will see, folks, if we're getting anything better. If voice is okay, we may be able to keep going, even if I'm a little bit max headroom. But all right, I'm hearing that the audio is clear. So you know what? We're going to keep going. Show must go on. This is Mark Tassin. This is Out of Character. Thank you for your patience as we were getting started tonight. But I'm going to go ahead and get rolling because we've got an awesome guest, and I don't want you guys to miss out on this. Our guest this week is none other than Richard Lee Byers, an amazing author whose stuff I'm sure you've read. Richard, welcome to the show. Sorry for the delays. We're having some technical issues, but uh, glad that you could be with us today. Thanks for joining.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, can you tell folks a little bit about you? I'm pretty sure most of our viewers know who you are, but for the one or two who maybe don't, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Okay, I've been a fiction writer for quite a while now. I mainly do fantasy and horror. Possibly best known for my Forgotten Realms books that I did for a number of years. I've done my own all original stuff and worked in a number of shared worlds too, like the World of Darkness and the Pathfinder universe. And currently, I'm doing Marvel Legends of Asgard novels for Aconite Books, and right now I'm working on a uh, book set in a new universe called the Drifting Havens, which will be like the Realms was at one time, a place for a lot of great gaming products and a lot of novels too.
Well,
And
that sounds
it's a
fantastic.
fantasy world. Um, I think that maybe when they get it done, it'll be completely compatible with fifth edition. Maybe with some extra rules, wrinkles that you can throw in to customize the world and kind of make it distinct from other settings. But anyway, it's going to be a cool place when we get it together and you start seeing products.
Okay. Well, that sounds fantastic. And, like you said, you've written for pretty much everybody, it seems like. You've written for Werewolf, you've written for Marvel, you've written for Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder. You know, how did you end up on this road of writing for all of these IPs, writing for all these tie-in companies?
Well, I started way back when, because I'm tragically old. Uh, 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 in the 1980s. And the 1980s, I knew I wanted to write horror and I knew I wanted to write fantasy. And the 1980s was a big boom time for original horror novels. And I said, well, I could see that horror is really, really booming. So I guess I'll try that first. And with my usual impeccable timing, I had decided to do that right when that big horror boom was about to collapse. So I did a couple horror novels, and all of a sudden I couldn't. All of a sudden there was no market for what I was doing anymore, and by that time I'd kind of gotten used to being a published writer, And I said, "Well, shit, I better look around for something else I can do pretty quick." And and I knew that gaming products uh, had associated fiction lines because I was a gamer. And
Yeah.
so I looked at things like the Forgotten Realms and the World of Darkness, and I thought, I know I can write these books. So I contacted the editors who were doing it, and to give me a chance to write some of this stuff, and they did, and I just kind of fell into a groove from there. Along the way, I have done all original stuff too, but I do seem
Yeah.
to keep coming back to the work for hire, shared world kind of franchises.
Yeah, and I mean, it's two very different types of writing. I mean, with your own stuff, you pretty much have free reign within the boundaries you set for yourself. But seems like for for the shared worlds, there's a lot of constraints on what you can do, isn't there?
Well, it depends on what exactly you're doing. I mean, there's different kinds of shared world writing. There's the kind of shared world writing where you're not only writing about a shared setting, but you're writing about established characters. Like I did an X-Men novel back in the day, and I couldn't make Wolverine a pacifist. That wasn't going to happen. I mean, I guess I could have had him. Yeah, that's it. I could have messed.
There you go.
I could have messed with the idea in the course of the book, but by the end of the book, he would have to be the Wolverine that everybody knows and loves. And
Right.
so you have somewhat more freedom um, if you're doing a shared setting but not shared characters. Although even then you run into some things like sometimes you'll have a great idea for Kingdom X and well, so and so is already writing a book set into Kingdom X this year, so we have some big gaming event going on in Kingdom X this year. So your thing wouldn't fit. So what else you got? And you got to be
Right.
flexible. And of course, there's this old standard rule: you can't use up the world, or you can't use up key elements of the world, which is can be a hard thing to adjust to because a lot of times that um, the story that would use up a key part of the world is exactly this first story you think of that you would like to write.
Right.
It's they'll say that it's like say the world is based around the conflict between the dwarves and the goblins, right? And their ongoing wars, and your first impulse as a writer might be to say, well, I'm gonna write the last of those wars. I'm gonna have the dwarves be the definitive winners and the goblins be the definitive losers, and by God, that'll settle it. Well, you can't necessarily settle it because they're depending on that conflict to drive a whole lot of other product going forward.
Hmm.
So you have to think of a lot of you have to think of stories that are interesting and consequential, but won't decrease the commercial viability of the setting for future use.
Right. You got to put the toys back on the shelf is one way I've heard it, or don't blow up the moon.
Yeah. Now,
So,
sometimes you can write that big story, but it has to be in conjunction with what the company wants to do. I've wrote a couple big stories that involved fundamental changes of Forgotten Realms, but they were stories that the company had decided they wanted told. Or if they wanted that outcome that I had in the book, that's like we've decided the Forgotten Realms should change in this way. Can you write the big trilogy that changes this element of it? And it's, yeah, okay, but so then I was writing the big story that makes a fundamental change, but it wasn't just because I
yeah.
sent an email one day saying, "Hey, wouldn't it be cool if," and we went from there.
Well, and sometimes they basically hand you like the executioner's hood, like Stackpole when they had him kill Chewbacca. It was like he took a bunch of grief around that, and he's like, going, "Well, I wasn't my idea. This is the story they wanted to tell, right?"
Yeah.
So
Yeah, unfortunately,
so
I've never had that situation like Bob, where I was, mandated to kill off a beloved character. I think Hickman and
right,
Weiss took some shit. Didn't they kill off Gold Moon at one point and then had to bring
yeah,
her back?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's not always good, even when you do it. So well, okay, so we're going to talk more about the worlds that you have written in. But before we do that, I want to just speculate on something. Are there worlds that you haven't written in that you're like, I would love to play in that setting? I'd love to get in there and tell some stories.
Well, I well, like I said, I've been doing the Marvel Legends of Asgard books, and I love those.
Hmm.
But Aconite Books actually has Marvel books that involve other aspects of the Marvel universe and other characters. I'd love to do some of those.
Yeah.
I'd love to write Spider-Man or Doctor Strange or whatever. And so far they've had been said, no, we need another Marvel Legends of Asgard book. So I'd love to do that. I've never done anything in the DC universe. I'd love to do something with Batman or Green Lantern.
Oh,
Uh,
that'd be cool.
I'm not. I'm not thinking of anything in particular that I want that other than those. Well, I noticed that S.M. Sterling it just has a Conan novel out, so apparently they're starting to do Conan pastiches again.
Oh, that'd be cool.
I have a good idea for a Conan novel if anybody ever wants to ring me up about that. I've got I mean there are a lot of characters I love in fiction that we don't necessarily think of as, shared universe characters particularly,
Yeah.
but like I said, apparently Conan is becoming that, and I would love to do a Conan book, or well, some of Robert E. Howard's other characters too. Like if they ever want anybody ever wants to bring me up to a Solomon Kane book, I'd love to do a Solomon Kane
Oh,
story.
that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Well, I think the cool thing about Solomon Kane, well, there are two cool things about doing Solomon Kane. One is that because Howard didn't write as much about him, there's more left to explore. And also, I think that kind of fantasy where you are able to combine the fantastic elements with real world history, and then in
Yeah.
this case, the history of the Elizabethan era, that kind of fantasy is very cool. So I'd love to do some of that. Which is Howard kind of soft pedaled that in his Kane stories. We don't really see much of Kane doing things that are particular to his era and his place, but I could do some of that.
Well, if I think it's Cabinet Entertainment, I think that's doing the new Conan novel, and so if that's true, and if they're listening, you've got your guy to do your Solomon Kane or more Conan stories. So
Right.
just putting that out there into the universe so that someone
Yeah.
will get it.
Yeah, I really do have a great idea for a Conan book, but I don't want to tell you not publicly what it is.
Yeah, yeah. Don't give it away. Don't give it away. Well, I think though that's what's interesting about that. Hearing you talk about this is that it's not worlds that attract you. It sounds like, but characters, right? And I think that that's an interesting distinction.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I mean, well, I guess even with the Marvel stuff or it's like it's characters there also, but it gets bored a little bit because there are so many cool characters, I think. But
Right.
but by and large, I think that's a valid observation. I mean, I've always kind of felt like I've never really been one of these writers that's just like, oh, we've got to build the world and in such intricate detail, and the world is going to be fascinating. It's in and of itself, and people are going to want to explore the world in and of itself. I mean, I respect that, but to me, it's like I want to see the characters in action doing interesting things, and you don't really have to develop the world for me much more than just what makes sense, in terms of
Yeah.
what's happening with the characters. Yeah, I'm a character guy.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. So, because we've mentioned Marvel Legends of Asgard, I know there's people listening going, why are you not telling us more about that? So, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about your Legends of Asgard novels that
Yeah,
are out.
it's I've done a trilogy. Two of them are out. The third one is out on October the 6th. And basically, I was trying to find something that would be interesting that I hadn't seen a lot of hadn't seen a lot of in the comics. Doesn't mean there isn't some obscure issue of Journey into Mystery from 1971 that somebody can dig out. We'll see, they did it here, but I, I I thought that the character Heimdall was interesting, and I didn't
Yeah.
think that there had been much done with it. But in particular, I didn't really think that he had ever been given much of an origin story. So I
Hmm.
did a trilogy where the first one is the Head of Mimer, which we see there. The second one is the Rebels of
Yeah.
Vanaheim, which we just had up. The third one is
Yeah.
the Prisoner of Tartarus,
Yeah.
which is coming out in early October. And these books take him from being just kind of another callow young warrior from Vanaheim to the god that we know from Norse mythology and Marvel Comics, where he's the kind of all-seeing, all-hearing, true god of Asgard and sentinel of the Rainbow Bridge. And
Yeah.
along the way, you'll see some other important Marvel characters and some key elements in kind of Norse slash Marvel mythology, like the building of the Rainbow Bridge and
Oh, cool.
the Norse gods, pretty much their first encounter with the Greek gods and stuff like that.
So, is this, just for the nerd in me, are we talking 616 universe comics universe? Are we talking MCU, or are you writing in something where you're able to blend ideas? How does that
Okay,
where
it's
yeah.
okay. It's a well. First time it was when I got the gig. I was told it's not the MCU. Don't write about the MCU. Or
All right, good. Got it.
you're writing about the comics universe. But even there, maybe not totally or not exactly. That's maybe like Marvel Universe 618. Next door to 616. What that means is that we try not to violate any point of Marvel lore that we think many people remember or care about. But like I said, if there's some 71 that has some detail in it, and we've got a killer story to tell where we're going to contradict that detail of that story from 1971, we're going to do it.
Uh-huh. Well, see, and that's where it's up to this is where the no prize comes in, right? You win the no prize
Uh,
for explaining why it makes perfect sense that you contradicted
right.
1971.
Like I
So,
said, there may be some Marvel comic somewhere I haven't read that gives the origin of Heimdall, and it's not the origin that I gave, but what can I tell you?
for what it's worth, I'm rereading I'm reading the Marvel comics. I started with Fantastic Four #1 using the Marvel Ultimate online thing, Marvel
Right.
Universe online thing. I'm up to 1976 to June of 76. I don't believe I've come across the origin of Heimdall. So just
Okay, well, that's good.
make you feel better.
Made it clear. Anyway, they're a lot of fun to write. I'm not sure. Like I said, I've got him up to where him from Marvel Comics, where he's like the fully functional Heimdall with his super senses and his magical gear and all this
Uh-huh.
stuff. I'm not so that when the third book comes out, that you'll have his origin complete. I'm not quite sure where he goes from here. I have an idea for another Marvel Legends of Asgard novel, but I'm not sure if he's the star of it or not yet.
Huh.
He doesn't have to be. He could be.
Heimdall spends so much time off screen in the comics that there are endless numbers of awesome things he could do. And yeah, I know he's supposed to guard, but considering the number of times Asgard's been invaded just in every couple of years, someone manages to get past him into Asgard, he clearly goes and does other things sometimes. So I think there's
Yeah, and
plenty
I
of
mean,
room for that, right?
and it's not really giving away anything to say that in my third book, I sort of established that he's not going to just stand there all the time.
Right. Yeah, because you get that impression sometimes you're like going, I don't know. Well, I wonder, like, when you're writing these, is there like a crack team of Marvel librarians who comb through your stuff, or are you kind of left like, yeah, here's access to a whole bunch of books, do your research, or how does that work when you're writing for
Well,
someone like Marvel?
it's a two-step process. It's a little more cumbersome than say I was writing a Forgotten Realms book because
Yeah.
uh, that only has to be approved in one place. The way
Hmm.
that the way that these work, because I'm not working directly for Marvel. I'm working for Aconite, that's got a license for Marvel. When I
Hmm.
when I come up with a proposal or a draft or whatever it is, first it goes to my editor at Aconite, and she has to like it. And then if
Hmm.
she likes it, then it goes over and people at Marvel look at it, and then they have to like it. So
Okay.
I tend to wind up doing you know 2 revisions where where in other circumstances I do 1 revision, but that's
Okay.
okay. It's just the way the process is. I the I don't really know. I don't have really know the people at Marvel who've reviewed my stuff. I mean, it's not like it's not like kind of A-list people whose names I know from the comics, who are
Yeah.
going over this stuff. But presumably they know their stuff. It's
So let me, are you a big comic book fan? I mean,
yeah.
are you,
I've been reading comics for a long time. I mean, as I've gotten older, comics have gotten more expensive, and I've gotten more jaded.
yeah.
My reading's kind of more selective, but I still have some Marvel comics that I really enjoy, and
Yeah. So
I,
it's
I think I still have the potential to really enjoy DC Comics, although they haven't been doing it for me so well lately. I've just been kind of out of sync with their approach, I think.
I don't know. I gotta admit, I've been enjoying going back and reading some of the older stuff that I've never read before. And I don't know if you ever read any of the horror comics. They just had a Werewolf by Night trailer that came out over the
Yeah,
weekend.
I read. I was a big fan of Tomb of Dracula.
Yes, Tomb of
Wolf,
Dracula.
Wolf and Colin and Palmer were doing it. I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I read Werewolf by Night. I read
And
Man Thing when Steve Gerber was doing it.
yeah, and
Um,
Frankenstein.
yeah, Frankenstein was one I didn't read so much. I only read Frankenstein was like, in this issue Frankenstein meets Dracula. Okay, then I'll read that one.
Well, he had a shorter run, right? Tomb of Dracula kept going. Werewolf by Night kept going. Man Thing kept going. But Frankenstein was the first one to drop. But I never expected to enjoy those as much as I'm enjoying them, and made me just thrilled when that Werewolf by Night trailer came out with the Man Thing in it. If you pause it at the perfect spot, you can see the Man
Yeah,
Thing.
that's
So
what somebody told me. That's the one. I haven't actually watched that trailer yet. I watched the trailer for Secret Invasion, but I haven't happened across the one for Werewolf by Night yet. But I liked Werewolf by Night. It's embarrassing, but all the time I was reading it, I never realized that the name of the character, Jack Russell, was a joke. It took me decades later before I realized, oh, there's a Jack Russell Terrier, and therefore, you know,
I wondered about that too. I was like, someone had to couldn't have done that accidentally. That had to be on purpose because it cracked me up when I saw that.
yeah, it
Well,
never occurred to me when I was reading the comic.
so those are called horror comics, but I know you've written horror. Is
Yeah.
that is that horror in your mind, or is it just a flavor of horror? What sort of horror do you enjoy writing? What sort of horror tales do you like to tell?
Well, I tend to like horror. Well, first off, I like supernatural horror a lot more
Mhm.
than kind of slasher horror or ordinarily.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll watch a lot of slasher movies, but if I'm going to write something, it tends to be supernatural.
Hmm.
And I tend to like certainly at novel length. I tend to kind of like the what I kind of call the horror adventure, where the characters at least seem like they have a chance to prevail.
Hmm.
And it's where they don't just get, it's not just a monster, rampaging through and smashing people who don't seem to have a hope.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, although that could be really effective when other people write it. I mean, the Haunting of Hill House is probably, is really basically a novel like that. And I mean,
Hmm.
you can't really find a better horror story than the Haunting of Hill House.
Right. Yeah. Fabulous. Fabulous show.
But I like that. I like cosmic horror. I like Lovecraftian stuff. Not I like as far as new stuff. I tend to be most impressed by the stuff that takes Lovecraft's fundamental ideas, but dispenses with the kind of standard mythos, creatures, and buzzwords, and forbidden tomes, because I think that's stuff's been
Yeah.
done so much. Like Ramsey Campbell, who's probably my favorite horror writer, did a cosmic horror trilogy very recently, which is very clearly cosmic horror, but it's not. But it doesn't use any of that kind of stuff. John Langan's book, The Fisherman, is to my mind a cosmic horror book that is brilliant and doesn't use any of that stuff.
Huh. So when you go to write something like that, what is the key to getting that right? What's the key to bringing cosmic horror or supernatural horror to life in a novel when you're writing?
Well, part of it is, part of it is just applying the same tricks that go into making any fiction vivid and dramatic, and just doing it with the intention of producing a horrific effect. It, it helps to, I think, to kind of, ease into it a lot of the time,
Hmm.
so that you kind of wear down the reader's suspension of disbelief by degrees, so that by the time that you're ready to really hit them with the horrible, impossible thing, it's like, well, yeah, because all this stuff obviously, was building up to that, and I get it. Uh,
Hmm.
as I mean, there's a lot you can do with kind of mood and tone. I mean,
Hmm.
Ramsey Campbell, one of the reasons I think he's a great horror writer is that, well, he does everything really well, but one of the things that he does is he can describe the most mundane thing with a metaphor, with personification or something, and make it creepy.
Hmm.
I'm nowhere near as good at that as he is. Nobody's as good at that as he is, but I've tried to do some of that.
That's cool. Yeah, I think that horror is tricky because, like, one of the things you talked about, like easing into it. I have seen folks who throw you into it so hard immediately that it feels less like horror and more like action. I don't know how else to describe the difference. It's there's
Yeah.
the horror goes away because you're already fighting, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, of course, but it's, it depends on the kind of story. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're doing, Train to Busan, you want to see those zombies pretty quick.
It's true. You don't want to be like 90 minutes in and here comes the first zombie, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like we all know that it's a zombie thing, so let's get to it. I mean, there's a lot of shades of horror, and what's going to make a particular story effective is not necessarily going to be the approach that makes another story
I
effective.
think
I mean,
it's funny
that's
because
true of that's true of fiction in generally. I think one thing you always have to bear in mind if you go to like a convention and you hear authors pontificating on what makes stories work. Well, you could pick up a lot of valuable information, but you should always have in the back of your mind that not all stories work the same way.
hmm
And the tricks that author so and so is describing that makes his fiction great might fall flat because you're trying for what you used to because you're trying to write a different kind of thing.
Yeah, and when you're talking about that too, I think there's this expectation that the reader has, and if you're too far off from that, you're going to sort of start chafing, right? Like if someone comes into it wanting to read some slow burn horror that sort of builds up over time, that's perfect. But if you have someone like there's a song by a group called Tripod called "Get to the Effing Monkey," and
No,
it's all about how long it took in the Peter Jackson King Kong movie to get to Kong. And it's sort of this whole idea of, if the reader's coming for something, if you take too long to get to the thing that they came for, you will potentially lose them along the way. Or if not, just leave them really frustrated.
yeah, it's interesting. There's always that kind of balance between what they want and and surprising them in a good way.
Yeah.
It's like if you just deliver a zombie story, which is exactly like a million other zombie stories, there are people who are really going to like it. Who are hardcore zombie fans, but there are people who are going to say, "Oh, it's just like all this other media I've already consumed." Conversely, if you do a zombie story that's very, very different, there are people
Mhm.
that are going to love it for being creative and original, and people who are going to say, "But I wanted to see George Romero zombies," So
That's interesting because one thing that's come up a whole bunch of times when we've been talking on this show is this whole idea of writing what you love versus writing what people expect. Now I know it's a little different, I guess, if you're doing tie-in, but even so, there's this whole idea that the best stuff that you create is going to be the stuff that you want to do, the story you want to tell, the story you want to create, not trying to twist it into something that you think the reader wants. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
well, I think that given that how much tie-in stuff I do, I would be. I would be probably look pretty hypocritical if I were to sing the praises of, following your muse and your muse solely. Uh, but I mean, I think that I think you have to ideally you find a balance. Maybe the balance just lies in the fact that by God, it turns out that the thing that you really want to do is the thing that people want to read. But
Yeah.
I mean, I've read some writers that I thought were really good who were offbeat, and you don't see new stuff from them anymore because their old stuff didn't sell, and
Hmm.
it's it's unfortunate. I think that those careers were cut short. Then there you have the people who are the people who are doing their 8,000th book in a particular popular series, and just continuing to crank them out, and you know there's an audience for that new one every time it drops. So I mean,
Yeah.
I don't really know that there's an easy answer to that. I mean, I'm very I'm very sensitive to and sympathetic to the to any writer that says I want to make a living. I want to be popular.
Well,
Uh,
I think that's true, but I think that, I mean, I bet, I'm just guessing, but knowing you, I bet that it's safe to say that the worlds that you're writing in are the sorts of worlds you enjoy exploring creatively, right? It's the
Yeah,
sort of
that's
stories
definitely
you
true.
like
I've
to
I've
tell and read,
I've
right?
there are actually a couple of prominent franchises, which I'm not going to name because it might sound
Yeah.
like I'm dissing them, even though I'm really not. Where I've never actually tried to get into them, even though I know it would be a lucrative gig if I did, because I just feel
Hmm.
like even though I actually enjoy this world, when other people do it, I just don't feel like I have any stories worth telling that could be in that setting.
Hmm.
And then there are even a couple worlds too where I look at them, and I'm really not gonna name these, where I look at them and say, "Well, that's just stupid." I
Yeah.
have no interest in this.
Well, I think that that's an important distinction, right? Because I think it's easy, especially if you're looking at tie-in fiction when you're getting started, and you know, to feel like for the rest of your career you have to do every single thing that's handed to you, and that's the job. And I've seen people kind of burn out from that, right? Which is why I sort of bring up this whole idea of, I mean, I know early on, if you can get a published gig, just do it, right? Do it,
Yeah.
write a
Mhm.
fantastic story, but at the same time, you know, be careful what road you head down, because you might end up stuck on that road too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm to a degree. I'm not dissatisfied with how things have worked out for me, but I mean, I
Yeah.
kind of sometimes wonder, well, if I hadn't gotten so locked into doing all this time fiction, I would have done more of stuff that was all original, and where might that have led? It's the kind of thing you can never know. You can never know where the road you didn't take would have led you. But
Right. You might be at your day job wondering what would have happened if you'd done the tie-in fiction.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, but I've done the tie-in fiction I've done has been it has all been stuff that has been congenial for me. Like I've done all this kind of sword and sorcery stuff like Forgotten Realms, and I've done the comic book stuff like the Marvel Legends of Asgard. I've done stuff in the Basil and Mobius universe, which a friend of mine named Ryan Schifrin in Hollywood puts together, and it's kind of like if the Grey Master and Fafhrd had been modern people, and
Uh-huh.
their forays into trying to steal stuff or whatever had consistently led them into encounters, all this stuff from urban legends and fringe science and stuff like that.
It's like
And
Fafford meets X-Files.
yeah, it's kind of like that. If or another way to put it is, if the people from the X Files, instead of working for the FBI and had been being terribly concerned about the objectives of law enforcement, and the government had just been out there to have fun and make a buck.
Actually sounds pretty fantastic.
Yeah, and so I've written a bunch of stuff in that, and that's congenial. So all the stuff that I've done pretty much has been stuff that I want to do. Like I said, it helps. I think me that I am kind of oriented towards character and story rather than the world building so much, or like taking tremendous satisfaction in building my own universe. Because
Mhm.
if if I've got a good sword and sorcery story to tell and I can drop it in the Forgotten Realms, sure, why not?
Yeah, right.
I mean that
So no, go ahead.
these universes are a lot of these universes are broad enough that you can tell all kind of stories in them. So go for it.
So speaking of Forgotten Realms, and I'm assuming this is from the realms, there I want to poor Jay Strali has said made a comment earlier to saying how much that Watsy needs to let you write more about the Reaver. So
Yeah,
just wanted to
like you don't have to convince me. You got to convince them. Watsy, Watsy discontinued Forgotten Realms fiction for everybody whose name is not R.A. Salvatore.
yeah.
And that's not a knock on Bob because he's a great guy and he's a fine writer and he deserves every bit of success and he deserves to continue his series within the realms. But so when I say that, I am in no way criticizing him. I just feel like it's kind of a shame that some of the rest of us aren't able to continue because our stuff was pretty good too.
No, I mean, a lot of stuff was great, and I think that's one of the challenges that I have right now that, even with our, a shameless plug, the world of Ataltis that you've seen, I really think that the fiction is a piece that I miss in a lot of the games that I play today, right? I love that tie-in fiction. It helps me to bring the world to life. It helps to create that sense of place of what sort of a world I'm diving into. And I think it is too bad when that gets sort of sidelined for business reasons.
Yeah, it's I mean, I can make a lot of arguments about why they should have done something other than they did, but it was their decision to make. Unfortunately, it's worked out.
Yeah, and
Maybe there's a Forgotten Realms or the D&D movie coming out, which is apparently set in the realms. Maybe that'll jumpstart something. I don't know, but I mean, to answer your to say more about that comment or that question was that if you read the Reaver, obviously there was supposed to be more. If you read
yeah.
a lot of the stuff that I wrote for the Forgotten Realms, obviously there was supposed to be more. I feel kind of bad about it. Sometimes I wouldn't have set up all these subplots that I was going to continue if I'd known that the whole thing was going to be cut off. But nobody was more surprised than me.
So I see maybe you could publish it as a Dungeon Masters Guild, self-publish as a Dungeon Masters Guild adventure on Drive Through RPG using the SRD and just put in stats for a couple of the characters in there, but then just have a whole lot of expository text in between.
I don't know. How much money do those things make?
I don't know. I mean, we'd have to
Yeah.
find out. Depends on how many people like Gistraler are out there ready to jump in on one of those. I don't know if that would work or not, but it'd be pretty cool. But that is one of the challenges of tie-in fiction is that, when it's your own stuff, you can bring it back, you can extend it, you can come back to it years later. But it
Yeah.
seems like one of the challenges with any sort of tie-in work is that a lot of times it gets boxed in and it just sort of disappears if you don't have any control over that, and that's got to be frustrating at times.
Although even with stuff that's all your own, I mean, if it doesn't sell, you can run into issues continuing it. If you do to start a series and you do two books and the publisher drops it because you didn't they didn't sell, and then you go to another publisher and you say, well, I've got this series that didn't sell books 1 and 2, but you can pick it up starting with book 3 because the old publisher still has holding the rights to books 1 and 2. Good luck.
Yeah, it is tough. And unfortunately that's the nature of the business side of it. And to a certain extent, if people aren't reading it, then maybe there is the question of why you would write it. I
Yeah,
mean,
I don't
just
know, but
bluntly, right?
I don't know. I mean, I keep talking to all these self-published people who tell me that self-publishing is the wave of the future, and that you can do really well self-publishing, and by God, then you aren't beholden to any of these, godless, blood-sucking publishers. But
Well,
I don't know the little forays I made into self-publishing did not work out financially. I'm proud of the product I produced, but
yeah.
it didn't generate a significant amount of income. I may make another crack at it eventually. I don't know. I I didn't seem to have the trick of it.
Yeah, I think that it's like anything these days. There's just we talked about this earlier before the show. There's so much content out there
Yeah.
these days that trying to get to where people can see it, it's really tough, right? It's a tough path. But we don't have too much time left, so I do want to bring up, speaking of things that you've worked on in the past. I have something very special that I've brought along to share with you that I thought you would enjoy. I want to know if the sequel to this is coming out anytime soon. Here we go. The night.
I was really I was very glad to be doing those, and it was and again, this goes back to something that I alluded to earlier, that the great horror collapse at the end of the '80s. This series that had just been launched was a victim of that,
Yeah. Yep.
and but I mean, I thought that it was a perfectly acceptable thing to be writing, and I was glad to be doing them. But
Well,
they said they Zebra dropped all fired my editor and killed the whole horror line, including those books for young readers.
I will. I'm going to admit to you, Richard, I have not read Party Till You Drop,
Oh, okay.
but the stuff I found online about it is that, I mean, it certainly is beloved by a lot of folks who read them at the time. So it is too bad that the business didn't support it. I think sometimes what happens is the publishers need to make so much that they need to sell way more than you might need to if you had a smaller, that's one of the advantages of self-publishing, is oftentimes as long as you can sell enough to cover your costs, it becomes a potential thing, but it's something a publisher might still never touch because their infrastructure is so vast.
Well, Nightmare Club, I mean, obviously it was an attempt to, at a certain level, to mimic the huge success that R.L. Stine and Christopher Pike were having at that time.
Yeah.
And I think that if it had been given a chance to build and find its following, it had a lot of potential. But like I said, the horror market kind of in general collapsed, and Zebra said, "Well, we're just not going to do horror anymore. Period." And the editor whose bright idea this was, and who was editing Richard's horror novel, we're going to fire her, and
Yeah.
that was the end of that.
And that's the business, right? At the end of the day. Well, then freed up time for you to work on also a bunch of the other awesome books that people have come to love that you've written over the years. So we'll thank them for that, I guess.
That's true. Yeah. You had said we're almost out of time. Shall I plug the convention I'm going to be at?
Yeah, actually, I want to talk about two more things. So let's
Oh,
talk
okay.
about Necronomicon. That's one of the things that's coming up. If folks
Yeah,
want to get to meet
yeah, I'm
you,
going to be my one remaining convention appearance this year, as far as I know, unless I get invited to something at the last minute, is Necronomicon, which is a Tampa Bay area SF convention, and it's kind of what we call general convention, something for everybody. We got gaming, we got cosplay, we got writer panels, we got all kind of stuff. It's the 923 to 925. It's in Tampa. The website is necrotampa.org, and you can check out things there. And I hope that people in Central Florida, at least, will come out and see me.
now is
Give me
this
some
sort of your
support on it.
home con? Like everyone has their home con that's close by.
Yeah,
Is
I'm
that?
actually I'm actually have a horrible conflict of interest here, I guess, because I'm actually one of the people that's in the group that puts it on, as well as being a writer program participant. But it's a cool event, and I hope some people come see it.
Now, is this it been around for very long? Is it a newer
Oh
con?
yeah, it's been around like 40 years.
Okay, so and how long have you been involved with it? Is
40
this
years.
something
So,
40?
yeah,
That's what I was going to ask. I mean,
since it started,
oh,
because like
that's
I said, I'm
fantastic.
tragically old.
But that's awesome, though. I mean, to have like, there's a con here called Yukon, which is primarily gaming, but I sort of feel like it's near to my heart because I've been involved with it for absolute years. And some of those cons are some of them, I don't know, I have the most fun at some of those cons because everyone's really passionate and they're there because they love it and they're there because they love the stuff you guys are doing, right? They can be
Yeah.
a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's always a good time. We had, we had to not do it for a year or two because of, well, did not do it at all because of COVID. And then we
Yeah.
had an online thing only, and then we're back live last year, but attendance was down because we've been away for a couple years. So we're hoping to see a more robust attendance, you know, again this year, and we're like I said, we're doing everything we can to make it a good time.
Well, folks who are in the area, now you know what to do this coming up next week. Head over to Necronomicon and spend some time there, and you can get to meet Richard as well. So, very cool. Well, the last thing that I want to talk about tonight before we wrap up is we always take a minute to spotlight somebody. Now, this might be somebody who's new to the business, it might be someone who's been around, but it's like more people need to hear of this person. And the person that we're going to talk about tonight, she's actually somebody I know. She's written stories for me as well. And I think she's a fantastic author, and she's got her own book coming. Who is it that we wanted to talk about tonight, Richard?
Well, I want to talk about Aaron M. Evans, who is I know a lot of good writers who don't get haven't gotten not yet gotten as much attention as they probably should. But Aaron is somebody that I thought maybe we should spotlight because her first book, which is I think it's her first book, which is not set in the Forgotten Realms, it is something that is all her own, is Empire of Exiles, which is coming out in November the 8th. And she's a very good writer. She did a number of books in the realms that are very well regarded and were kind of different tonally and thematically than what any of the rest of us were doing. She really put her own stamp on things, and I think that her. I have not read this new book yet, but I confidently expect it to be very good indeed, and I hope people will pick it up.
Well, she's a great author, and I am very much looking forward to reading this one as well because I think it's very cool to see her. If she's free from any constraints, what does she do? Where does she go with it? So that ought to be a lot of fun to get to read. So that's November 8th that's coming. So, folks, another one for your list of the folks that we've gone through. I should set up a page where you can check out all the people we've recommended. Erin Evans, she is a great author, wrote for Forgotten Realms, but she has a new book coming out on November 8th. So that is all the time that we've got. I have to wrap things up so we can close things down before the next show starts. But Richard, thank you so much for joining us today. It's just been great having you on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. It was really great being here.
And good luck at Necronomicon. I'm sure you'll have a great time, folks. Look him up there. And thanks again, Richard. We'll talk to you later.
Okay, thank you.
Well, folks, that's it. We have used up almost all the time we've got. We've just got a few minutes left here to wrap things up. It was great having Richard on the show. We have got a bunch of amazing authors and artists and even musicians coming up in the near future. I'm going to be posting a full schedule soon. So that's something new that we're going to be doing. Next week, we have a very cool guest, Stefan Pokorny, the creator of Dwarven Forge. It should be a very cool conversation. I'm really looking forward to talking to him and finding a little bit about his path to what got him to where he is. Amazing sculptor and put together a fantastic business. So that should be very cool for next week. Again, thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time.